We're going to start with our live feature. Dr. Alex Elswick is here today to tell us about Voices of Hope. Alex?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm Dr. Alex Elswick. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky, and I'm a co-founder and a current board member of Voices of Hope, which is a recovery community center in central Kentucky and Lexington, Kentucky. And I've got just 4 minutes and I'm timing myself, so I'm going to move quickly. The first thing that you would notice if you walked into our center in Lexington that I think is distinctive is there's not as much discussion about drugs and alcohol, certainly not as much discussion about abstinence. And that's not because we don't support abstinence, but because we recognize that our entire treatment infrastructure in our community is dedicated to abstinence, and there's very little support for other pathways. So we traveled to the Northeast to CCAR in Connecticut and Anchor in Rhode Island to learn from those RCCs. And it was really beneficial to see that there are different models and that it can be implemented in different ways on the ground. And we came back to Lexington and began programming sort of traditional RCC programming. So things like telephone recovery support, on-site recovery coaching, hosting lots of different mutual aid meetings to support various pathways of recovery. But as we began doing that work, we started to notice that that the infrastructure was supporting abstinence and abstinence alone, and just nothing more than a wink and a nod to medications for opioid use disorder and also for people who use drugs, because we recognize that everybody who's in recovery today was once a person who used drugs, and that's a really fertile ground for outreach. So with regard to medications for opioid use disorder, we developed an anti-stigma campaign because we recognize that all the time when we look to lift up examples of people in recovery, we make the mistake of only lifting up examples of people in abstinence-based recovery and sort of neglecting other pathways. So we started by lifting up real examples of people with lived experience with medications of opioid use disorder. We started a transportation program where our drivers, who are recovery coaches, will drive people to methadone providers so that they can get access to that medication that's so tightly controlled. We also have a barrier relief fund that might help someone to initiate or retain on medication for opioid use disorder, or maybe help fix their vehicle so that they can drive themselves, something like that. So a real explicit focus on initiation and retention of MOUD. And then with regard to people who use drugs, we've done a number of things, also an anti-stigma campaign and an outreach campaign. And we asked our community advisory board, what do we need to say to get people who use drugs to understand that a recovery center is for them, that it's not just a place for people who are abstinent. And they said, just say that. So our marketing materials said something like actively using ? You belong here, right? We also have a mobile unit which dispatches to locations where people who use drugs will frequent. And we were concerned about the viability of the van. And I'll tell you that the very first day that the mobile unit was on the ground, we reversed an overdose with naloxone, which makes it pretty meaningful, I think. On our mobile unit, we distribute things like harm reduction supplies. We're by law not allowed to distribute syringes. So we distribute safer using kits, fentanyl testing strips, things to that effect. We also distribute supplies more related to basic needs because we recognize that sort of universal recovery capital, food and water and blankets. And then the last thing I'll mention that I think is just cool and unique is one of my colleagues at the University of Kentucky came to us, and her name's Dr. Hartley Feld. She said, I think reproductive health access is a part of recovery capital. And we said, of course it is. And so she developed these things called, I think they're called pregnancy empowerment kits for people who can become pregnant. And they contain things like prenatal vitamins and a little bit of information. And it's just a way to provide sort of non-traditional recovery capital to the people who need it most. So that's Voices of Hope. And thank you all for this opportunity. I appreciate it.